Folks, for the next session, we are going to get back into table discussions that I'm going to explain momentarily. As I mentioned earlier today, this next hour we're going to give you a chance to choose from a couple of different discussions, and you're going to have two chances to take part in 20 to 25-minute discussions. Before I do that, I want to just take about 5 minutes to present a few ideas around content and data generation to help set up what some of these discussions are. Because the sense that we get from having spoken to different individuals and groups of people, both here and in the other cities that we've been working, is there are lots of folks who have a sense that, hey, we're doing something with online or blended content, and that may be teacher created, or it may be adaptive software like a Dreambox or an Achieve 3000. It may be an open educational resource like the National Repository of Online Courses. What we tend to find is that we get individual teachers, individual schools, sometimes district-wide, that have a sense that, yeah, we know content and we know that one really well. So I want to frame the way we're thinking a bit more broadly about content and talking about some issues in acquisition, and then tell you what these different table discussions are going to be so that you can share some different ideas, some of the challenges you're having, explore what some of the pros and cons of these different areas are. As a starting point, I want to mention that we think of content as one of the building blocks of blended programs. We tend to think in terms of content, teaching, technology, and operations. Scott mentioned the blended learning guide that he's worked on. There's a number of different conceptual frameworks, ways to think about this. And I think the most important thing is to recognize you can put those pieces together in all sorts of different ways. What do you rely on the content for? What do you rely on the teaching for? What are the other elements that you're bringing into your program as well? It's a confusing approach because there are so many different examples or so many possibilities out there. And as some of the panelists have talked about today, it's going to be really useful when there are more examples, more paths to go forward. There are some right now. There still aren't that many such that any school or district can look out there and say, yeah, that looks like what I want to do, and that's my path forward. There's really countless different approaches that you can take. There's also pretty close to countless different content options. This simple graphic comes from some research that Innosight did, and it's a bit outdated, but it still makes the point. These are just different content sources that schools were using, schools that Innosight was looking into. They're not trying to be representative. They're just trying to make this point. There's a lot of different content providers up there. There are some that are providing full courses, that are some that are providing a full curriculum. There are some that are focused on math or language or one other area. And by the way, some of these have been acquired or merged. They're constantly changing. The point is, a few years ago, if you were launching an online or blended program, you can say, you know, I'm just going to look at what's out there and decide what the best option is for me. You can't really do that anymore. There are too many options. You're going to get confused. You're going to be susceptible to choosing the best sales pitch instead of the solution that really fits your needs the best. And so we tend to think about content considerations across a couple of different spectrums. Whether you're looking, for instance, at single subject areas, are you looking for math software or reading software? Are you looking for software that's adaptive, that may be looking at creating drills and looking at specific skills for students? That tends to be one type of content provider. On the other hand, are you looking at something that is more of a full curriculum? Is it something like a Moodle platform where your own teachers are creating content? That's a different approach as well. And somebody on a panel earlier today made the point that at this point in time, you simply cannot optimize for all those things. We may get to that point in the next few years. We're not there yet. If you don't decide which of these you're really trying to get towards, which is why we've talked about the need for defining those educational goals. If you don't define that early on, you run the risk of spending a lot of time looking at different options without truly thinking about what's going to be that best mix. For people who have spent a lot of time looking at software, looking at learning management systems like Moodle or Blackboard or Desire to Learn, or looking at full courses from places like Apex or the National Repository of Online Courses, the amount of data that's generated out of some of these closed systems I'm using Dreambox as an example. Sorry, I'm using Khan Academy as an example here. And by the way, I want to mention, we're using some examples here. When we show the videos, there's going to be some that we're showing. We're not endorsing any of these. There are way too many. And so we're not trying to endorse any of them. We're just showing you some examples. So Khan, as many of you are familiar with, provides that student dashboard. So students are able to work through and understand where they are in a progression. And Amy talked about this a little bit earlier as well. When you look at others like ST Math and other math programs, you've got data dashboards that allow teachers to know where classrooms are and administrators to know where classrooms across the school are. That tends to be fairly different than the type of thing that individual teachers can create. This is that example from Dreambox, showing the administrator dashboard. So a school administrator can see how different classrooms are doing. This is the type of content, of data generation out of that content that's fairly difficult to do at this level if you're using teacher-created content. But yet there are very good arguments for that type of approach as well. We hear from many individual teachers and schools who say, we want to individualize this to our students. We know our students best. And it's not just teachers telling us that. We've heard from students as well when we run focus groups. Students saying, you know who I want on that video? I want my teacher on that video. Is that the right approach or not? I still don't know. I think we're still in the early stages of figuring that out. But I think there are good arguments for all these different types, including, again, this teacher-created type of content. This is a screenshot coming from a math program created by NROC, the National Repository of Online Courses, which is a nonprofit open educational resource. This is the type of content that's delivering a lot more presentations and lectures and that sort of thing, instead of the kind of drill and skill software that creates that level of data. Here's where you get into a question as well. If you take the NROC material as an example and deliver it in its own environment, its own proprietary environment, it does a better job of creating that data back to teachers and administrators. If instead you put it in a Moodle environment, you gain some flexibility, you gain some ability for teachers to create around that content, and you lose some of that really good data generation and the ability for that data to be delivered in a dashboard. I know I've just thrown a lot of information at you, and it's really just a starting point to kick off these discussions. I'm hopeful that these discussions are going to help you think about some of these conceptual frameworks and some of the specific ideas and challenges that you're working with. You know, there are several resources out there that are really very helpful in terms of questions to ask when evaluating content. One of our table discussions is going to be about that. But I want to just mention, and this one comes from the California Learning Resource Network, looking at questions like, is the content engaging? Are you able to modify instruction? Are there multiple types of assessments? Can teachers add lessons? And by the way, if you're looking at a specific provider's content, will they give you a teacher account to log in and a student account as well, so you're able to see what all of that content is? These are a few different sources for some of these standards. I'm sure that quite a few of you are familiar with. Point is, you don't have to recreate all these. So much of these standards and rubrics are available in a variety of places. So with that, I want to make sure the table facilitators are ready. Can I have you all hold up your papers just so that I know, in fact, you're ready? Excellent. Now put them down so I can explain what we're doing. So in a minute here, you're going to have a chance to figure out where you'd like to go and what two topics you would like to talk about. I'll mention that we're doing 2 rounds of this. We've got 8 different areas. We're going to have about 20 to 25 minutes in each, and you get to self-select where you want to go. I'm going to mention what these areas are. When I talk about it, I'd like each facilitator, if you could just stand and show your piece of paper. I'll ask that nobody move yet until I say go, so that we can go through all of these 8. The first one is Carrie in the back is going to be leading a discussion that's going to include showing some videos in part about some of these content options, looking at what that Dreambox dashboard looks like, looking at Achieve 3000. It's going to be a bit more of a wide-ranging discussion. And when we break, if you'd like to do that, then Carrie is your woman for that. Up here, we have Scott Benson, who's going to be looking at the rocket ship rubric for evaluating content, not so much to evaluate, well, how well did rocket ship do, but just thinking about how do you create and think about creating a rubric in order to decide what content you want. Again, that's the sort of the opposite side of just looking at sales pitches and deciding who you're going to go with. Mike from Ed Elements, where'd you go? Mike, if you could stand up, please. Ed Elements, as I think quite a few of you know, provides a platform that allows different schools to choose from among different content providers on one platform and be able to integrate some of that data. So Michael's going to be talking about different platforms and that data generation. And by the way, I should mention, I've said Mike's going to be talking about that, Scott's going to be talking about that. Let me go back and clarify. It's not really about these folks presenting. It's much more about leading and facilitating table discussions. At one of the tables that I was at earlier today, there was quite a bit of talk about teacher-generated content. That's absolutely an important part of the options. And Kevin from DPS up here is going to be looking at that. And I'm sorry, Rachel from Cherry Creek. Kevin and Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. Next one, open educational resources. Dan is going to be talking about OER. And it's somewhat tied to when teachers are creating their own content, it's very difficult to be creating really good multimedia. Even really good graphics can be difficult. Dan has really been the leading organization here in Colorado thinking about how to aggregate some of those open educational resources, and will be leading a discussion about that. Next up, Eric will be talking about adaptive software systems. And Eric and Scott, I'm sure you realize at this point that we don't want you at the same table. So when we break, you two will split up. And Amy Anderson, who's going to be talking about project-based learning. You don't have a sheet? Okay, that's Amy. She's going to be talking about project-based learning. You'll just follow her. In fact, Amy and Scott and Eric, if you three could split up while I'm talking now, so that once we all split, people will know where to go. The last one here is going to be sharing and co-creating content. So the question always comes up, how many districts, how many different schools, teachers, etc., are creating an Algebra 1 course? Do we really need to do that 150 times over in Colorado? eLink is trying to get around that. There are others who are thinking about that as well. Kurt and Judy are going to be leading a discussion about that. Let me ask Joe. Joe's my check-in here. Joe, did I make that clear enough?
I think you did.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to take 20 minutes, about 22 minutes, in fact, for the first one of these sessions. Then we will call time and have you choose a second one as well. So keep in mind, you get 2 chances to do this. I'll ask the facilitators again to stand up and hold your papers up so that people who want to have that discussion can find you. And now it's time to go.